One train station, just one, cost more than building an entire city for 50,000 people. Not a palace, not a cathedral, a train station for peasants waiting for locomotives. But what if I told you these weren't just train stations? What if these buildings are the last remnants of the Tartarian Empire, a civilization that was systematically erased from history? I have the receipts, I have the invoices, I have the construction budgets that were supposed to be destroyed in accidental fires. And what I found will make you question everything you thought you knew about the 19th century. Because these architectural marvels, with their impossible grandeur, their advanced engineering, their mysterious symbols, they don't belong to the Industrial Revolution, they belong to Tartaria. Why would anyone spend the GDP of a small nation on a waiting room? Why does a ticket hall need marble imported from quarries 2,000 miles away? Why does a building for the common people have more gold leaf than Versailles? Unless it wasn't built for the common people, unless it was built by an advanced civilization that we've been told never existed. And most importantly, who really paid for all of this? Was it the Tartarian survivors desperately trying to preserve their legacy before it was completely erased? Let me show you something that shouldn't exist. This is an original procurement document from 1862, the Grand Central Depot in New York. Final construction cost, $6.4 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's approximately $180 million in today's money. For a train station. Or rather, for what they called a train station, because researchers of Tartarian history recognize these buildings for what they really are, the remaining public structures of a world civilization that spanned continents. Now let me show you what else you could build with $180 million in 1862. You could construct an entire planned city, complete with housing for 50,000 residents, a hospital, 3 schools, a town hall, sewage systems, gas lighting, paved roads, parks, and public squares, with money left over. But they chose to build a train station. The original budget, $2 million. It tripled. No, actually, it more than tripled. And this wasn't an isolated incident. This happened everywhere, in every major city, simultaneously, during the same 30-year period. The exact same 30-year period when Tartaria was being systematically removed from maps and history books. Coincidence? St. Pancras Station in London, initial budget £315,000. Final cost, £1.5 million. That's nearly 5 times over budget. The Gare du Nord in Paris, similar story. Leipzig Hauptbahnhof in Germany, even worse. The ratios are insane, consistently insane, across different countries, different contractors, different governments. But here's what keeps me awake at night. These aren't just cost overruns. Cost overruns happen. Projects go over budget. That's normal. What's not normal is the pattern. What's not normal is that every single one of these stations has the same architectural features that make no economic sense whatsoever. Features that match perfectly with the architectural style attributed to the Tartarian Empire, the same grand scale, the same impossibly advanced engineering, the same attention to beauty and function that served no purpose in the primitive 19th century we're told about. Vaulted ceilings 70 feet high in waiting rooms. Why? Acoustically engineered domes that create perfect sound distribution. For what purpose? In a train station? Gold-leafed friezes depicting celestial maps and geometric patterns. Stained glass windows that would make cathedrals jealous. Marble pillars, each weighing 30 tons, transported hundreds of miles before modern machinery. And they built hundreds of these structures in the span of just 3 decades. The same decades when old maps showing Tartaria were being replaced with new maps that showed only the nations we recognize today. Almost as if someone was rewriting history while simultaneously building structures that had always been there. The Pennsylvania Station in New York, demolished in 1963, much to everyone's regret, was modeled after Roman baths. Roman baths for people catching trains. Its main waiting room was larger than the nave of St. Peter's Basilica. The floor was Tennessee marble. The walls were travertine imported from Italy. There were skylights covering an entire city block. For a train station. Let me read you something from the Architectural Review when it opened in 1910. "One enters the city like a god." That's a quote. Like a god, not like a commuter, not like a businessman, like a deity entering a temple. This is Tartarian architecture. This is how the Tartarian civilization built, with reverence for the divine, with understanding of sacred geometry, with technology that made the impossible routine. Now ask yourself, who builds temples for commuters? But wait, it gets stranger, because I found the contractor records, the actual names of the companies that supposedly built these megalithic structures. Want to know something interesting? 70% of them disappeared within 5 years of project completion. Just vanished. No forwarding address, no subsequent projects. Companies that supposedly had the expertise to create architectural marvels that modern engineers struggle to replicate, and then they just dissolved into thin air. Unless they didn't build these structures at all. Unless they were renovation companies, restoration crews, teams hired to clean up, repair, and rebrand Tartarian buildings for a new historical narrative. The Morrison and Foster Construction Company built 3 stations across America in the 1870s, each one a masterpiece of engineering. Then, nothing. Gone. No records, no successor companies. It's as if they never existed. And the investors? Oh, the investors are even better. Shell companies, holding groups with names like the Continental Development Trust or the Transatlantic Infrastructure Consortium. Sounds official, doesn't it? Except when you trace them back, they lead to addresses that don't exist, to board members whose names appear nowhere else in historical records. Board members who might have been Tartarian descendants, survivors of the Great Reset, people with knowledge of the old world, working in secret to preserve what they could before it was completely destroyed. Someone was funneling absolutely massive amounts of money into these projects, and they were very, very careful to cover their tracks. Now, I want you to consider something. The official narrative is that these stations were built during the railroad boom, a time of rapid industrialization and economic expansion. Fair enough. But here's the problem. The economics don't work. A standard calculation in 19th century construction, you could build approximately 400 modest homes for the cost of one luxury hotel. Using that ratio, the money spent on Pennsylvania Station alone could have housed 20,000 families. The Grand Central Terminal could have built 30,000 homes. But instead, they built stations everywhere, all at once, in cities that didn't even have significant populations yet. Detroit's Michigan Central Station opened in 1913. It was designed to handle 200 trains per day. In 1913, Detroit was averaging 47 trains per day. They built capacity for 4 times the existing demand. The station had halls and passages that went unused for decades, entire wings that served no purpose. Unless these buildings weren't sized for 1913 populations, unless they were sized for Tartarian populations, for a world that once had different demographics, different needs, different purposes for these magnificent structures. Why? Why build so much excess capacity? Unless these buildings weren't really built for the purpose we've been told. Unless they're Tartarian inheritance buildings being repurposed and rebranded for a post-reset world that needed a new explanation for their existence. And that's just the surface level, because when you start looking at the architectural details, the things they don't mention in history books, that's when this rabbit hole becomes a bottomless pit. I've been researching this for 2 years, and I'm uncovering new impossibilities every single week. The structural engineering alone defies everything we're told about 19th century capabilities. It defies 19th century capabilities because it isn't from the 19th century. It's Tartarian technology. It's the remnants of a civilization that mastered engineering, acoustics, energy, and architecture in ways we're only beginning to understand. If you're the kind of person who can't let mysteries go unsolved, if you need to know what's being hidden in plain sight, you're going to want to follow this investigation. Because next week, I'm releasing documents that showed these stations weren't just expensive, they were impossible. And I mean that literally. Documents that prove these structures existed before the official construction dates. Maps showing these buildings decades before they were supposedly built. Evidence of the Tartarian cover-up in black and white. Hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to reveal about the construction timelines will shatter the official story completely. But before we get to the impossible construction schedules, we need to talk about what these buildings actually look like. Because calling them train stations is like calling the pyramids tombs. Technically accurate, maybe, but missing the entire point. These weren't built for trains. They were built by Tartaria for purposes we're only beginning to understand. Walk into any major train station built between 1850 and 1920. Close your eyes. Forget what you've been told it is. Now open them. What are you standing in? A cathedral, a palace, a temple to something ancient and powerful. You're standing inside a Tartarian structure, one of the last remaining public buildings of an empire that once covered most of the known world. The Leipzig Hauptbahnhof in Germany has a facade longer than 2 football fields. Its main hall is 298 meters wide. The ceiling vaults reach 28 meters high. There are 26 platforms, sure, but above them there are decorative elements that serve absolutely no functional purpose for train operations. Sculptural reliefs, astronomical symbols, geometric patterns that repeat in mathematically precise sequences. The same geometric patterns found in other confirmed Tartarian structures across Asia and Europe. The same mathematical ratios, the same architectural language. I had an architectural historian, off the record, tell me something fascinating. If you removed all the train-related elements from these stations and showed me only the structural design, I would assume they were government buildings from a lost civilization. A lost civilization, like Tartaria, the civilization that's been systematically erased from our textbooks. Let's compare, shall we? The Palace of Versailles, the ultimate symbol of royal excess, has approximately 2,300 rooms and covers 67,000 square meters. Impressive, right? The Gare d'Orsay in Paris, now the Musée d'Orsay, covers 57,400 square meters of floor space. It's almost the same size as Versailles. But Versailles was built for the Sun King. The Gare d'Orsay was built for ticket counters and luggage claim? Or was it built as a Tartarian administrative center, a hub for a civilization that needed grand public spaces for purposes we can't even imagine? The waiting room alone in the original Pennsylvania station could fit the entire Palace of Westminster's Central Hall inside it twice. But size is just the beginning. It's the details that reveal the truth. St. Pancras Station in London. Look at the exterior. Really look at it. Gothic Revival architecture, they call it. Pointed arches, flying buttresses, ornate spires. The Midland Grand Hotel attached to it was called the most romantic building in Britain. Romantic for a train station? But Gothic Revival is code. It's the term they use when they don't want to say Tartarian original. Because this isn't revival. This is preservation. This is restoration of original Tartarian Gothic architecture. The facade contains over 60 million bricks, each one individually placed. The iron framework supporting the train shed behind it, a single-span arch 245 feet wide and 100 feet high, was the largest such structure in the world when it was built. And it was built in 1868, using technology that supposedly consisted of horses, pulleys, and manual labor. Let that sink in for a moment. The largest single-span arch structure in the world, built before electric cranes, before hydraulic lifts, before modern steel production. Built before those things existed in our timeline. But Tartaria already had advanced metallurgy, already had engineering knowledge that surpassed anything in the modern 19th century. But okay, let's say they managed it through sheer human effort and ingenuity. Hard to believe, but let's grant them that. Now explain the acoustics. The main waiting hall in Grand Central Terminal has something called the Whispering Gallery. You can stand at one corner, face the wall, and whisper, and someone standing at the diagonal corner 50 feet away can hear you perfectly, crystal clear, as if you were standing right next to them. This isn't an accident. This is acoustic engineering, the kind of precision that requires detailed knowledge of sound wave physics, material resonance, and architectural geometry. In the early 1900s, they supposedly just stumbled into creating this. Or did Tartarian architects design these spaces with acoustic properties for specific purposes? Communication? Rituals? Technologies we don't understand? The Leipzig Hauptbahnhof has similar acoustic properties. So does the Milano Central. So does the Helsinki Central Station. All of them create these strange sound phenomena, pockets where noise disappears entirely, corners where every sound amplifies. It's intentional, deliberate, designed. Designed by Tartarian engineers who understood harmonics, resonance, and the relationship between architecture and energy in ways our modern science is only rediscovering. Why would you need sophisticated acoustic engineering in a building where the primary sounds are supposed to be announcements and the rumble of trains? Unless these spaces were designed for something that required precise sound control. Gatherings? Ceremonies? Frequency and vibration experiments? Unless these were Tartarian temples, centers of learning, spaces where frequency and vibration were harnessed for purposes we've forgotten. And then there's the symbolism. Oh, the symbolism. I'll focus on just one example, the Antwerp Central Station in Belgium. The local people call it the Railway Cathedral. When you enter, you're greeted by a massive dome covered in murals depicting industrial progress, trains, locomotives, workers, standard 19th century stuff. But look closer. Study the geometric patterns surrounding these images. Repeated motifs. The flower of life, sacred geometric patterns, celestial alignments. And here's where it gets weird. These same patterns appear in ancient temples around the world. Literally identical geometric ratios, the same mathematical relationships found in the Great Pyramid, in Greek temples, in Hindu mandirs, and in Tartarian structures across Central Asia. The same symbols, the same mathematics, the same sacred geometry that formed the foundation of Tartarian architecture and technology. Coincidence? Maybe. But these patterns appear in train stations across Europe, Asia, and North America. Always the same ratios, always the same underlying mathematics. Because they're all Tartarian. They're all part of the same architectural tradition, the same civilization, the same empire that we're told never existed. The Milano Central has zodiac symbols embedded in its architecture. The zodiac, in a train station. The ceiling of the main hall features astrological signs aligned with actual celestial events. During the summer solstice, sunlight enters through specific windows and illuminates particular areas of the floor in sequences. This is archaeoastronomical alignment, the kind of thing you find at Stonehenge or Angkor Wat, not at buildings designed to sell train tickets, but exactly what you'd find in Tartarian structures, which were built with deep understanding of celestial mechanics, solar alignment, and the relationship between earthly architecture and cosmic patterns. The Gare de Lyon in Paris has a clock tower that's an exact replica of a Renaissance bell tower, but with modifications. The clock face includes symbols that don't correspond to any standard timekeeping system. There are markers for divisions that don't exist in our 12-hour system. Researchers have tried to figure out what these symbols mean. They can't. The official explanation is decorative artistic choices. Decorative, sure. Or it's a Tartarian timekeeping system, a remnant of how that civilization measured time, perhaps in units that made sense for technology we no longer possess. Let me tell you what else is decorative. The ventilation systems in these buildings work without electricity. The natural airflow through these massive structures is so perfectly engineered that they maintain comfortable temperatures year-round, despite having no modern HVAC systems. Air flows in specific patterns, creating circulation that prevents stagnation and maintains air quality. Modern architects have studied these systems. They can't fully replicate them. We have computers, fluid dynamic simulations, advanced materials, and we can't create natural ventilation as efficient as what exists in buildings supposedly designed in the 1800s with pen and paper.
Tartarian climate control, free energy ventilation, systems that work with natural forces rather than against them, technology that seems like magic because we've forgotten the science behind it. The Zurich Hauptbahnhof has passages that stay naturally lit during daylight hours through a system of skylights and reflective surfaces. No direct sunlight, but every corner is illuminated. It's like the building itself channels light. Modern lighting designers have studied it. The angles, the materials, the positioning, it's mathematically optimal, impossibly optimal. Optimal because Tartarian architects understood light as energy, understood how to channel, direct, and utilize natural forces in ways that our oil-dependent civilization abandoned or was forced to abandon. So we have buildings that look like temples, sound like concert halls, and function like precision instruments. Buildings decorated with ancient symbols and engineered with impossible precision. Buildings that match the Tartarian architectural style in every detail. Scale, beauty, advanced engineering, harmonic design, celestial alignment. And we're told they built all of this in dozens of cities simultaneously in just 2 to 3 years per structure? No. They restored all of this. They cleaned up Tartarian buildings after the mud floods, after the reset, after whatever cataclysm brought down the empire. Let me show you why that's completely impossible unless you accept the Tartarian explanation. The official record states that St. Pancras Station was built between 1868 and 1876. 8 years. Sounds reasonable for such a large project, right? 8 years after the great mud floods that buried the first floors of buildings across Europe. 8 years after maps stopped showing Tartaria. 8 years into the cover-up. Except when you break down what would actually need to happen in those 8 years, the timeline becomes absolutely absurd. First, site preparation. The site was a densely populated urban area. They had to demolish existing structures, relocate thousands of residents, and excavate foundations deep enough to support a building of that mass. In the 1860s, this meant manual labor, picks, shovels, horses, and carts. Or, and follow me here, they had to dig out a Tartarian structure, remove the mud and debris from a catastrophic flood, uncover what was already there. Estimate for this phase, using period-appropriate technology, 18 to 24 months. Let's say they did it in 18. Next, the foundation. St. Pancras required foundations that could support not just the building itself, but the constant vibration and weight of trains. They laid thousands of tons of concrete and stone. The foundation work alone, using manual mixing and placement, would require another 12 to 15 months. Let's say 12.
Unless the foundation was already there, already built by Tartarian engineers centuries earlier, already capable of supporting whatever they needed to place on top of it. We're now at 30 months, 2.5 years, and we haven't built a single visible part of the structure yet. Now comes the brickwork, 60 million bricks, each one individually placed by hand. A skilled bricklayer in the 19th century could lay about 500 bricks per day. That's 120,000 days of work. If you had 100 bricklayers working simultaneously, which would be an enormous labor force, that's 1,200 days. That's over 3 years just for the brickwork. Except if you're not laying new bricks. If you're cleaning existing bricks, repointing mortar, replacing damaged sections. Restoration work goes much faster than new construction. We're now at 5.5 years, and we still don't have the roof, the iron framework, the interior finishing, the decorative elements, or any of the thousands of other details. The iron train shed, the largest single-span arch in the world at the time, required custom-forged iron ribs. Each one had to be manufactured, transported, and assembled with millimeter precision. The engineering calculations alone would take months. The manufacturing would take years. The assembly would require specialized equipment that didn't exist yet. Tartarian metallurgy, Tartarian engineering, already present, already there, just needed to be adapted for the new railroad purpose. But here's where it gets truly impossible. I found construction records, fragmentary but they exist, showing that major structural work on multiple sections of St. Pancras happened simultaneously. They were working on foundations, brickwork, iron assembly, and interior finishing at the same time. That's not how construction works. You can't install interior marble while you're still laying the foundation on the other side of the building. The structure needs to settle. You need to complete load-bearing elements before you add decorative weight. Basic physics. Yet the records show parallel construction across the entire site, as if different teams were working completely independently, following a master plan so precise that everything aligned when they met in the middle. As if they were all working from Tartarian blueprints, original plans, documents showing exactly what the building looked like before the mud floods buried it. They weren't constructing, they were reconstructing, following plans that already existed. A modern engineer I spoke with, who worked on the reconstruction of Grand Central Terminal, told me the coordination required for that kind of simultaneous construction would be difficult even with modern project management software, real-time communication, and GPS surveying equipment. In the 1960s, impossible. Impossible. That's the word that keeps coming up. Impossible if they built it from scratch. Perfectly reasonable if they're excavating and restoring a pre-existing Tartarian structure. Let's look at another example. The Leipzig Hauptbahnhof. Official construction time 1907 to 1915. 8 years. For a building with 26 platforms covering 83,640 square meters, with a facade 298 meters long. Using period-appropriate technology, remembering this is before widespread use of electric cranes, before modern concrete, before welding as we know it, the foundation work alone should have taken 3 to 4 years. The steel framework, 19,000 tons of it, would require manufacturing time, transportation, and assembly that would span another 4 to 5 years. The stone facade, the interior finishing, the platform construction, we're looking at a minimum 15-year timeline. Minimum. They did it in 8. Because it was already there. The core structure was Tartarian. They modified it, adapted it, added trains, but they didn't build it from nothing. But wait, maybe they had more workers than we think. Maybe they threw unlimited labor at the problem. Okay, let's explore that. The construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza employed an estimated 100,000 workers over 20 years. That's for a structure that's essentially a pile of precisely cut stones. No interior rooms, relatively few compared to a train station, no windows, no decorative elements beyond the exterior. St. Pancras has thousands of rooms, multiple floors, complex plumbing, gas lighting systems, decorative elements on every surface, and structural requirements far more complex than stacking stones. Even if we assume they had 50,000 workers, which would be documented, you can't hide 50,000 people, the timeline still doesn't work. There's not enough hours in the day, not enough space on the construction site, not enough coordination possible with 19th century communication technology. And remember, they were building dozens of these structures simultaneously, all over Europe, all over America, all following similar architectural principles, all exhibiting similar impossible features. All of them Tartarian, all of them being excavated, cleaned, and officially opened as if they were new construction. The greatest architectural cover-up in human history. The Central Station in Milan, 1912 to 1931, 19 years. Okay, that's more reasonable, right? Except construction was halted during World War I for 5 years, so actually it was built in 14 years. A building that covers 66,500 square meters, with a facade 200 meters long, with interior decorations that include thousands of square meters of marble, bronze sculptures, and stained glass windows. 14 years, during which they also had to deal with war shortages, labor strikes, and economic instability. Unless World War I wasn't about halting construction, unless it was about controlling access, keeping people away while the real work happened, the work of transforming Tartarian structures into new buildings for the post-reset. The Helsinki Central Station, 1904 to 1919, 15 years. But like Milan, construction was disrupted by World War I and the Finnish Civil War. Actual construction time? Approximately 9 years. A pattern emerges. Regardless of disruptions, delays, or logistical challenges, these buildings get completed in timeframes that make no sense. It's as if the timeline is fixed, as if someone decided this will take 8 years, and then reality bent to accommodate that decision. Because the timeline wasn't for construction. It was for the cover-up, for the official story to mature, for the Tartarian origins to be forgotten by a new generation who would accept the railroad narrative without question. I've got a whole database of construction timelines, worker records, and engineering analyses that I'm still working through. The deeper I dig, the more questions emerge. Questions about construction techniques that shouldn't have existed, about materials sourced from impossible distances, about architectural features that require knowledge we supposedly didn't have, knowledge that Tartaria had, technology that Tartaria mastered, capabilities that were systematically erased from history along with the empire itself. And here's the thing, next week's video is going to blow this wide open, because I found the financial records, the actual money trails showing where the funding came from, and let me tell you, it's not from the sources the history books claim. The money traces back to Tartarian descendants, survivors who had inherited wealth from the old empire, people desperately trying to preserve their heritage before it was completely destroyed. If you want to see proof that something much larger was happening here, make sure you're subscribed, because what I'm about to reveal about the investor networks will connect these train stations to something far more sinister or far more ancient than anyone has suspected. It will connect them directly to Tartaria, to the cover-up, to the systematic erasure of an entire world civilization. Speaking of money, let's talk about where this absolutely massive amount of funding actually came from. Because official construction budgets are one thing, but when you trace the money back to its source, that's when you find the Tartarian survivors, the hidden inheritors, the people who knew the truth and fought to preserve it. Financial transparency wasn't exactly a priority in the 19th century, but even by the standards of the time, the funding for these train stations is suspicious. Let's start with the basics. Major construction projects typically have clear funding sources: government bonds, private investors, bank loans, or some combination. The paperwork exists. We can trace the Suez Canal's financing. We can track the funding for the Brooklyn Bridge. We have detailed records of who paid for what. But when it comes to these train stations, the money appears from shadows. The Grand Central Depot in New York, remember, had a final cost of $6.4 million, triple the initial budget. Where did the extra $4.4 million come from? The official answer is additional private investment. From whom? The records say various stakeholders and development trusts. That's not an answer. That's a dodge. I found ledger entries in the New York Public Library archives. Funding came from something called the Atlantic Infrastructure Consortium. Sounds official, sounds legitimate. So I tried to find out more about this consortium. Who were the principals? What other projects did they fund? What was their corporate structure? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The name appears in relation to Grand Central and 2 other stations, one in Boston, one in Philadelphia, and then vanishes. No incorporation papers, no board meetings, no successor entities. It's as if this organization existed solely to funnel money into these 3 projects and then dissolved. But here's what's really strange. The amounts transferred were precise, not approximate, not rounded. The Atlantic Infrastructure Consortium provided exactly $2,847,392 to Grand Central. Exactly. Down to the dollar. How do you estimate construction overruns to the exact dollar before the project is complete? You don't, unless you know exactly what you're paying for. Unless the overrun isn't an overrun at all, it's the real budget and the initial figure was just for public consumption. Let's go deeper. The Gare du Nord in Paris. Initial funding came from the Compagnie des Chemins du Nord, the Northern Railway Company. Standard stuff. But when costs ballooned, additional funding appeared from international investors. I found references to this in French banking archives. The international investors included entities from London, Amsterdam, and Vienna. But when you try to trace these entities, they lead to addresses that were empty lots, registered offices that didn't exist, contact names that appear nowhere else in commercial records. One name kept appearing, the Continental Development Trust, based in London supposedly. Except there's no record of any such trust being registered in London. No office, no officers, no business dealings besides funding train stations. This entity invested in the Gare du Nord, the Leipzig station, and the Milano Centrale, millions and millions of francs, marks, and lire, and then, like the others, they vanished. What kind of investment group pours that much money into infrastructure projects and then disappears without claiming returns? These stations made money. Railway companies were profitable. Investors should have been collecting dividends for decades. But these mysterious trusts and consortiums, they invested and vanished. It's not how money works. It's not how investors behave, unless they weren't investors in the traditional sense, unless they weren't looking for financial returns. Here's another anomaly: currency exchanges. Remember, we're talking about projects spanning different countries with different currencies. Moving money across borders in the 19th century was complicated and expensive. Banks charged significant fees for currency exchange and international transfers. Yet I found transfer records showing funds moving between Paris, Leipzig, New York, and London with virtually no exchange costs, as if there was some kind of unified financial network that bypassed normal banking channels. Money appearing where it was needed when it was needed without the usual friction of international finance. The Pennsylvania station in New York received funding from American banks, sure, but also from sources listed as European capital reserves. I traced one of these transactions back to a bank in Vienna that handled the transfer. The Vienna bank's records show the money came from private holdings. Whose private holdings? Consolidated European estates. That's 6 layers of obfuscation before you even get to a real name. And when you finally do reach what should be an actual person or entity, the trail goes cold. Records destroyed in fires, buildings demolished, archives lost. Speaking of fires, let's talk about those for a moment. An extraordinary number of financial records related to these train station projects were destroyed in fires. The Grand Central records? Major fire in the railway company offices in 1892. The Milano Centrale records? Fire in the municipal archives in 1943, blamed on the war. Leipzig? Bombing in 1945. Again, the war. Helsinki? Fire in 1927. One fire is an accident. 2 fires is unfortunate. But this many convenient fires destroying specifically financial records? That's a pattern. And it's not just fires. Records that survived show signs of alteration. Ledger pages with entries crossed out or overwritten, invoices with dates that don't align with other documented events, contracts signed by people who, according to other records, were dead at the time. There's a document in the London Metropolitan Archives, a funding agreement for St. Pancras, signed by someone named Edmund Rothwell. I spent months trying to find anything about Edmund Rothwell. Nothing. No birth record, no death record, no other business dealings. He appears on this one document representing millions of pounds and nowhere else in history. Either he was using a pseudonym, or someone forged his signature, or the entire document is fabricated. Any of those options raises serious questions. So we have money from nowhere, flowing through ghost organizations, transferred via impossible networks, documented in records that keep conveniently disappearing. And that money built structures in a pattern. A very specific geographical pattern. Because when you map out where these stations were built, you don't see random distribution. You see something else entirely. Something geometric. Something deliberate. Something that looks like a network. Take a map of Europe. Mark every major train station built between 1850 and 1920. Now connect them with straight lines. What do you see? At first, nothing unusual. a network of transportation hubs, as you'd expect. But then start measuring the distances, start calculating the angles, start looking at the relationships between positions. Patterns emerge, mathematical patterns, geometric precision. The distance from Paris Gare du Nord to Brussels Central Station, 314 kilometers. The distance from Brussels to Cologne, 223 kilometers. The ratio, 1.408. The golden ratio is 1.618. Close, but not quite. But then you measure from Cologne to Frankfurt, 223 kilometers, and from Frankfurt to Stuttgart, 157 kilometers. That ratio, 1.420. Still not the golden ratio, but remarkably consistent. And when you include Leipzig, Milan, and Vienna into the network, these ratios repeat again and again, 1.4 to 1.5, specific, intentional spacing. This isn't random. Random distribution would give you all sorts of ratios, but we see clustering around specific values, as if these stations were positioned according to a mathematical formula. Now let's go deeper. Connect the major stations with triangles: Paris, Brussels, Cologne, Brussels, Cologne, Frankfurt. Measure the angles. I'll save you the math. Many of these triangles have angles that approximate 60 degrees. Equilateral triangles, the most stable geometric form, found in architecture worldwide from pyramids to modern buildings. But here's what's interesting. When you overlay this network of stations onto ancient trade routes, Roman roads, medieval pilgrimage paths, old merchant routes, they align, not perfectly, but significantly. These stations sit on top of historical transportation networks that date back thousands of years. The Milano Centrale sits at a junction where 5 ancient Roman roads converged. The Leipzig Hauptbahnhof sits as positioned on what was once a major medieval trade route connecting the Baltic to the Mediterranean. Paris Gare du Nord, built on ground that archaeological surveys show has been a transportation hub since Celtic times. Coincidence? Maybe these are just naturally strategic locations for transportation. That's the obvious explanation. But then why are the distances between them so mathematically consistent? Natural geography is chaotic. Human trade routes follow terrain, water sources, political boundaries. They don't create geometric patterns. Unless someone was deliberately positioning these stations according to a pre-existing map, a template, a plan that existed before the railroads. Let's cross the Atlantic. The major train stations in America: Grand Central in New York, 30th Street in Philadelphia, Union Station in Washington, D.C., Penn Station when it existed. Map them. Measure them. The distance from New York to Philadelphia, 130 kilometers. Philadelphia to Washington, 195 kilometers. That ratio, 1.5. There's that number again. But it gets stranger. When you extend lines from these stations westward following the major railroad development, the stations continue to appear at these mathematically consistent intervals. Chicago Union Station, St. Louis Union Station, Kansas City Union Station. The spacing maintains those same ratios, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6. It's like someone laid out a geometric grid across the entire continent and said, build here, here, and here. Now, I want to show you something that's going to sound insane, but I've checked this dozens of times, had mathematicians verify it, and the numbers don't lie. Ley lines. You've probably heard of them. Hypothetical alignments between ancient monuments, stone circles, and sacred sites. Most scientists dismiss them as coincidence or pattern-seeking behavior. Fair enough. The evidence has always been shaky. But when you overlay the positions of these train stations onto known ley line maps, particularly the work done by Alfred Watkins in the 1920s, there's correspondence. Not complete, but significant. The St. Pancras station sits on a ley line that connects Stonehenge to sacred sites in Norfolk. The Leipzig Hauptbahnhof aligns with a theoretical line connecting ancient Germanic ritual sites. The Milano Centrale sits on a line that connects Roman temples across northern Italy. You could say this is cherry-picking, that if you draw enough lines, you'll find alignments. And normally I'd agree with you, but here's the thing. Watkins identified these ley lines in the 1920s, after these stations were built. He didn't include train stations in his analysis. He was focused on ancient structures. But when you add the stations to his maps, they fit the pattern. Either the train station builders somehow knew about these alignments before Watkins discovered them, or they were following the same underlying geographical logic that ancient people used when placing sacred sites. There's a third option, of course, that these aren't coincidences at all, that whoever built these stations had access to ancient knowledge about geographical energy points, or strategic positioning, or something else entirely. And before you think I've gone completely off the deep end, let me show you something else: underground water. Many of these stations sit above significant underground aquifers or at the intersection of underground water flows. Now, ancient peoples often built sacred sites above underground water. There are dozens of papers on this phenomenon. Wells, springs, and water sources were considered sacred. Temples and stone circles often mark these locations. The Zurich Hauptbahnhof sits above an underground river. The Antwerp Central Station was built over springs that had to be carefully diverted during construction. The Hamburg Hauptbahnhof required extensive pump systems because of groundwater. If you're choosing locations purely for railroad logistics, why would so many of these stations end up above water sources? Wouldn't that make construction more difficult and expensive? Unless water location was part of the selection criteria. Unless these sites were chosen not despite the water, but because of it. So we have a geometric network aligned with ancient pathways, positioned over underground water sources, and built at enormous expense by ghost organizations using impossible timelines. But I haven't shown you the most disturbing part yet, because some of these stations weren't built from the ground up. Some of them were excavated. I'm going to show you some photographs. Early photographs from the construction period, the kind that usually show workers and scaffolding and half-built structures, except that's not what these show. This is a photograph from 1869, the construction site of the St. Pancras Station in London. Look carefully at the background. What you're seeing isn't construction, it's excavation. They're digging down, and what they're uncovering doesn't look like virgin soil. There are stone foundations visible in this photograph, massive stone blocks, already in place, already fitted together. The workers are clearing rubble and dirt away from structures that already exist. The official explanation? Previous buildings were on this site and had to be demolished to make way for the new station. Sure, that makes sense, except these stones are too large, too precisely cut, and too deeply buried for recent construction. I showed this photograph to an archaeologist who specializes in Roman-era construction. His response? Those are definitely older foundation stones, Roman-era or earlier. But why would they build a train station directly on top of ancient ruins without documenting them? Good question. Why would they? Here's another photograph. Leipzig, 1907. Early excavation for the Hauptbahnhof. The workers are standing in a pit approximately 20 feet deep. Behind them, clearly visible, are architectural elements, columns, partial archways, structures that extend below the excavation level. These aren't mentioned in any construction reports. There's no archaeological documentation, no records of discovering ancient ruins during construction. The photographs exist, but the official narrative ignores them completely. The Helsinki Central Station, 1904. Construction photographs show workers removing rubble from what are clearly pre-existing structures. One photograph shows a partial dome, already constructed, already in place, that the workers are building around rather than demolishing. That dome isn't mentioned in the architectural plans. It's not credited to the official architect, Eliel Saarinen. It's just there, and they incorporated it into the new structure. Why? If you're building a brand new station, why would you preserve and incorporate elements from older ruins? Unless those elements were too difficult to remove, or unless they served a purpose you needed to maintain. The Pennsylvania station photographs are even telling. There's a series of images from 1904 showing the excavation phase. They're digging down for the foundations, and what they encounter are tunnels, extensive tunnel systems that clearly predate the railroad era. The official explanation is that these were old sewer systems or utility tunnels. But look at the construction. These tunnels are built with the same precision as the train station above them. Vaulted ceilings, dressed stone, architectural details that don't belong in sewers. One photograph shows a tunnel junction with what appears to be carved decorative elements on the walls. Sewers don't have decorative elements. These tunnels were built for a different purpose. And here's what's truly disturbing. They didn't fill them in. The Pennsylvania station was built over these tunnels, incorporated them, used them. There are stories, unofficial whispered stories, that some of the lower levels of Penn Station connected to these older tunnel systems, that you could access passages that went far beyond the station itself. After Penn Station was demolished in 1963, those tunnels were sealed, filled with concrete, made inaccessible. Why? If they were just old utility tunnels, why not repurpose them? Why go to the expense of sealing them off? The Milano Central has similar stories. During construction in the 1920s, workers reportedly discovered chambers beneath the site, large chambers with walls made of perfectly cut stone. These chambers were documented in workers' diaries and local newspapers, but never officially acknowledged by the railway company. When construction was complete, these chambers were supposedly sealed behind the station's foundations. No archaeological survey, no historical documentation, just buried and forgotten. Or hidden. I spoke with an urban explorer in Milan who claims to have accessed some of these spaces through maintenance tunnels. He described rooms with architectural features that don't match any known building style. Geometric patterns on the walls, strange acoustic properties. It felt like a temple, he told me, not a basement. Of course, I can't verify his story. The areas he described are sealed off, unauthorized to access, and the railway authority denies they exist. But if they don't exist, why guard them so carefully? I know what you're thinking. This sounds impossible. It sounds like fantasy. But the photographs don't lie. The evidence is there, buried in archives, hidden in construction records that most people never bother to examine. And I'm not done digging. In fact, I'm just getting started. This kind of research takes years, connecting documents across different archives, different languages, different countries. But every piece I find adds to the puzzle, and the picture that's emerging is something far bigger than just expensive train stations. If this kind of investigation fascinates you, if you want to see where this leads, drop a comment below with your thoughts. Seriously, tell me what you think is happening here. Because the community researching this topic is growing, and we're sharing information that's helping unlock even more mysteries. Your perspective might be the piece that connects everything. So hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Let's figure this out together. So we have structures built on top of older ruins, incorporating ancient elements, sealing off mysterious chambers, buildings that cost more than cities, positioned in geometric patterns, funded by ghost organizations, and built in impossible timeframes. There's one more piece to this puzzle, and it's the piece that finally makes the whole thing make sense. Or rather, it raises the question that unlocks everything. What were these buildings really for? Let's review what we know. Train stations that cost exponentially more than comparable structures. Architectural designs that resemble temples more than transportation hubs, construction timelines that defy physical possibility, funding from organizations that don't exist, positioning in geometric patterns across continents, built on top of ancient ruins and aligned with sacred sites, acoustic engineering, astronomical alignments, and symbolic decorations that serve no functional purpose for moving trains and passengers. Now here's the question that changes everything. What if they weren't built for trains at all? What if the trains were the cover story, the public explanation for something else entirely? Think about it. You want to build massive structures in every major city, buildings with specific architectural features, specific acoustic properties, specific positioning, buildings that need to be connected in a network. Buildings that might need to access older underground systems or tap into geographical energy points or serve purposes that the public can't know about. How do you do it? How do you convince governments and populations to fund these projects without questions? You give them a reason everyone can understand: transportation, progress, modernization. The railroad boom provided perfect cover. Everyone could see the trains. everyone could use the stations. No one questioned why these buildings needed to be so elaborate, so expensive, so precisely positioned. But who would do this? Who had the resources, the knowledge, and the motivation to build a secret network of structures disguised as train stations? Some researchers point to the Freemasons. Many of these stations do contain Masonic symbolism. The Leipzig Hauptbahnhof has square and compass symbols incorporated into the facade design. The Milano Centrale has geometric patterns that match Masonic temple designs. And we know that Freemasons were heavily involved in 19th century construction projects. But the Freemasons, while secretive, aren't that secretive. They take credit for their major works. They document their involvement. If this were a Masonic project, we'd have records, rituals, acknowledgments. The silence is too complete. Others suggest it was a governmental conspiracy, a secret collaboration between European powers and America to create a hidden infrastructure network. For what purpose? Communication? Transportation of something other than people? Storage facilities hidden within public buildings?
Possible, but governments leak, politicians change, regimes fall. If this were a governmental project spanning decades in multiple countries, someone would have talked by now. Documents would have emerged during regime changes, revolutions, wars. The fact that we have almost nothing suggests it wasn't governments, at least not official government channels. There's a darker possibility, one that sounds like fantasy but fits the evidence better than anything else. What if these buildings are remnants or reconstructions of something from before? What if the Tartarian architecture people talk about online isn't myth? What if there really was a previous civilization, a global empire with advanced knowledge of engineering, acoustics, geometry, and astronomy? And what if that civilization fell, was destroyed, or deliberately erased from history? The survivors, or the inheritors of their knowledge, would need to preserve something. Key structures, strategic positions, sacred sites, but they couldn't do it openly. The new powers, the new governments, the new historical narrative wouldn't allow it. So they did it in secret. They used the railroad boom as cover. They built train stations that incorporated ancient foundations, replicated ancient designs, and maintained the geometric network of the previous civilization. They hid the old world inside the new one, in plain sight. Crazy? Maybe. But it explains the impossible timelines. They weren't building from scratch, they were restoring. It explains the excessive costs. You're not paying for construction, you're paying for secrecy. It explains the ghost organizations, fronts for a hidden group preserving ancient knowledge. It explains the geometric positioning. They're following an older map. And it explains the excavation photographs. They're uncovering, not constructing. And it explains why these buildings are being systematically demolished or altered today. Pennsylvania Station, gone. Countless others, modernized, which usually means stripping away the original features, sealing off the older sections, removing the symbolic elements. If these buildings contain evidence of something that challenges our understanding of history, someone would have a strong motivation to erase that evidence. So here's where I leave you. I don't have all the answers. I'm not claiming I've solved this mystery. What I'm showing you is that the official story, the comfortable narrative of industrial progress and railroad expansion, doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Something else was happening in the 19th century, something bigger than we've been told. These train stations are evidence of that something. Whether it was a secret society, a hidden remnant of an older civilization, or something else entirely, the evidence is there. But evidence needs investigators. It needs people willing to look at old photographs and ask uncomfortable questions. It needs researchers who can connect documents across different archives. It needs you. So I want to know, what do you think is really going on here? Are these the remnants of Tartaria? Are they Masonic temples disguised as train stations? Are they part of a government conspiracy that spans centuries? Or is there another explanation I haven't considered? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share what you know. If you have access to local archives, old family records, construction documents, anything that might add to this investigation, let's collaborate. Subscribe to this channel because this investigation is ongoing. Every week I'm releasing new findings, new connections, new evidence. The truth is buried in these buildings.
literally buried under layers of renovation and modern construction, but it's still there, and together we might be able to uncover it. Because here's the real question, the one that should keep you awake at night. If they went to this much trouble to hide something, how important must it be? And who are they? Are they still around, still watching these buildings, still ensuring the secrets stay buried? Next time you walk through a grand old train station, look up, look at the details, look at the symbols, and ask yourself, what am I really standing inside? The answer might be something we're not supposed to know, but maybe it's time we found out anyway.